Welcome to Live, life-inspired views for every day. My name is Chris Meyer, and I'm a curious soul. In 1997, when our two children were in high school, I accompanied their youth group to New Orleans for the ELCA Church Youth Gathering. One night at 2 a.m., someone pulled the fire alarm in the hotel. The doors opened, and high school students from across the United States poured into the stairwells to evacuate the hotel. Nobody ran. Nobody pushed, and nobody screamed. When the all-clear was given, they returned to their rooms. But about 45 minutes later, the alarm was pulled again. The kids filled the stairwells. Nobody ran, nobody pushed, and nobody screamed. After it happened a third time, they were all told that whoever was caught would have to be flown home at their parents' expense. Well, it didn't happen again. But I did observe a curious thing. All these students were from across the United States. And yet nobody ran, nobody pushed, and nobody screamed. Then it dawned on me. In every school, in every state, 4 times a year, they perform mandatory fire drills. They come from their classrooms, make a line, nobody runs, nobody pushes, and nobody screams. They developed a habit. In our brains, when something is repeated over and over, the dendrites form pathways that can induce an automatic response, almost like breathing. We've all driven somewhere familiar while thinking of something else and suddenly realize we could hardly remember driving the route. Or when you are toweling yourself dry after your morning shower, do you notice that if you interrupt your pattern, you can hardly finish wiping? You almost have to leave the shower wet. Routines do that to us and often can be very helpful. I used the story about the fire alarm and showering when I taught study skills to elementary students, hoping that they would catch the idea of repeating the pattern and the practice of studying every day in order to become disciplined in their learning. In last week's podcast, I introduced a quote by the author of The Secret Garden, Frances Hodgson Burnett. She said, "You learn things by thinking about them and saying them over and over until they stay in your mind forever." Oh, how true. I've been a storyteller for nearly 40 years. One time, when I shared a story at a meeting, someone asked, "How do you remember all those stories?" My pastor at the time, L.I.V.E, said, "That's because she says them over and over." We all laughed, but how true it was. Last week, I drove to Minneapolis to catch a plane to Seattle to spend the week with our wonderful grandson and his family. On the way to Minneapolis, I decided to listen to all these podcasts over again on my Spotify app. It reminded me again how much listening to something we want to instill in our behavior or attitudes can be enhanced by repetition. I listened to them all over again on my way back to Waverly. Demosthenes, an ancient Greek statesman, had a speech defect. He could not be understood because of the defect in his stammering. He overcame this impediment by speaking with his mouth filled with pebbles and reciting verses while running. His surviving speeches have affirmed his place as one of the greatest patriots and powerful orators of ancient Greece, all because he repeated the drill with the pebbles over and over. The story about Demosthenes was on a cassette tape about leadership that I listened to over and over while I was driving. My hope was that I could garner leadership qualities from the wise adages I continued to listen to on that cassette. So, what do you want to become? What can you practice or repeat over and over to become that which you hope to be? Find the practice or recording or book that you can repeat, listen to, or read over and over until you become it. So on some paper, write Frances Hodgson Burnett's quote, "You learn things by thinking about them and saying them over and over until they stay in your mind forever." And put it on your bathroom mirror. Let it remind you to repeat the practice that helps you become what you hope to be. If Demosthenes can do it, so can you. Join me next Monday for Live, life-inspired views for every day. I'm Chris Meyer, and I'm a curious soul.